In this video, we are going to take a look at some examples of while loops. The first example is as follows. We have an integer x set to 0, and while x is less than 10, we're going to perform some operations. So I've set up a chart here so we can identify the different steps within the loop. So the first value is x is 0. Is 0 less than 10? That will be set to true. Then we need to figure out what's the value of x modulus 2. Remember, the modulus returns the remainder of a division, so 0 divided by 2 would be 0, so there's no remainder. The remainder is 0 here. And so the new value of x would be x plus 6 equals 3, which would mean the new value of x is 3, and I can bring it back down to the next iteration of the loop. The else is skipped, and I go back up to the while loop. Now x being 3 is 3 less than 10. That will be evaluated as true. Then I need to evaluate what's x modulus 2, and then 3 divided by 2, the remainder would be 1. So in that case, I do the x minus minus for the evaluation, and that would give me 2. So in the next iteration of the loop, x is now 2. Is 2 less than 10? That still evaluates to true. Then I go through the process of evaluating x modulus 2. Is 2 modulus 2 is going to be 0 because there's no remainder in that division. And so if it's 0, I'm going to do x plus equals 3 for changing the value, and then 2 plus 3 would be 5. So that's my new value of x, 5 here. Now I can do the next loop. For my while loop here, I evaluate this x less than 10. Well, x is 5, so this evaluates to true. Then 5 modulus 2, the remainder of that division would be 1. So in that case, I'm going to do the operation. I'm sorry, it's supposed to be x minus minus. And x minus minus is in this example would be I'm going down to 4. So the new value of x is now 4. Is 4, I'm going back through an iteration of the loop here, is 4 less than 10? That evaluates to true. So in that case, I get inside the loop and I check 4 modulus 2. That will be 0. In that case, I'm in the if portion of the statement here. So x becomes x plus equals 3, which is 4 plus 3, 7. Next iteration of the loop, x is now 7. 7 is still less than 10, so that evaluates to true. Then I get into the if statement by checking the value of x modulus 2. In that case, it will be 1. That's the remainder of 7 divided by 2. And therefore, x needs to be minus minus. And that would be down to 6. Next iteration of the loop, x is going to be 6. So 6 is less than 10, evaluates to true. Next, I need to evaluate what's 6 modulus 2, which will be 0. In that case, x is going to be plus equal 3, which is 9. All right, next value of the iteration for the loop is x equals 9. 9 is less than 10. That evaluates to true. The value of x modulus 2 is not 0, but it's 1. The remainder of 9 divided by 2 is 1. So in that case, x becomes x minus minus, which is 8. Then I iterate my loop here on the new value of x, which is 8. 8 is still less than 10, so that evaluates to true. 8 modulus 2 is 0 in this case, so I'm going inside of the if statement where x becomes plus equal 3, which is 11. Then I come onto the new value here for x is 11. The x is less than 10 evaluates to false, and the loop does not iterate anymore. So you can see the final value of x before at the end of the loop, is 11. And I went through the loop 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times total. So that explains this example here with the while loop. So we're moving on to the next example. This is a do while loop instead, where x is beginning at the value 4 and then we're going to execute the loop. So in the do while loop, it's a post check. That means the condition is checked at the end of the iteration of the loop. So the do is going to tell us to do x plus plus, which becomes 5. And then we check if 5 is less than 3. That evaluates to false. And in that case, the loop stops iterating right there. Note that I only did the iteration once. And then the value of x after the loop would be 5. So that was a quite simple example here. Next example is a while loop where the value of x starts at 4. And then we have a very simple while loop. So here, because it's a regular while loop, it's pre-check. So I'm going to check the condition first. And then 4 is not less than 3. So this evaluates to false. And therefore, I do not iterate through the loop at all. So I don't do any iterations there. These two examples show us that in a do while loop, the loop is going to be executed at least once, and then in a while loop, the condition would determine whether the loop is going to iterate or not. So if the condition is false from the beginning, there will be no iterations. In a do while loop, it will execute at least one time, even if the condition from the get-go is false. Let's move on to the next example. We have a variable x set to 0 at the start. In the do while loop, we're going to increment x by 1 and then check the condition. So this is a pretty simple loop. X starts with the value of 0. I execute the loop. Now the value of x is 1. And then is 1 less than 10? That evaluates to true. So I move on. The new value of x being 1. I execute the loop. Now x is 2. 2 is less than 10, that evaluates to true, and I move on to the next iteration. Now the value of x is 2. I need to do the x plus plus, which makes it become 3, and 3 is less than 10, that's still true. Next iteration, I start with the value of 3, that was from my previous iteration. 3 plus plus is 4, and 4 is less than 10 is still evaluating to true. Next step, x is 4, x plus plus becomes 5. 5 is less than 10, that evaluates to true. My value of x is now 5. I do x plus plus, that gives me 6. 6 is less than 10, that evaluates to true. Move on to the next iteration. At the beginning, x is 6. I do x plus plus, it becomes 7. 7 is less than 10, that evaluates to true. And I can just repeat the loop here. At the beginning of the loop, x is now 7. I increment it by 1, which becomes 8. 8 is still less than 10. So I iterate again. X now, before I start the code, is 8. 8 plus plus becomes 9. 9 is still less than 10, so that's great. I begin the loop with x equals 9. I do 9 plus plus, which becomes 10, and then that evaluates now to false, so I leave the loop there. At the end of the loop, the value of x is 10, right? That's the final value, and I iterated through the loop 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, exactly 10 times. So that demonstrates this example. All right, one more example here for the while loops, and then we'll be done. In this example, we have a regular while loop, similar to the previous one, where x begins at 0, and I check the condition first. So actually I should reverse my columns here, because the condition is going to be checked first, and then I'm going to do the x plus plus here. So I should reverse really those two to be sure I kind of follow the order in the way that loop is going. So I start with x equals 0. 0 is less than 10, that evaluates to true, so x becomes 1. In the next iteration, now x is 1. 1 is less than 10, that evaluates to true. X becomes 2. In the next iteration, x is now 2. 2 is still less than 10. X becomes 3. In that 3 is less than 10, that evaluates to true. Now x is 4. 4 is the next value for the next iteration. 4 is less than 10, evaluates to true. Comes up to 5. 5 is less than 10, that evaluates to true. I increment it to 6. 6 is the new value. 6 is less than 10, that evaluates to true. Now x becomes 7. 7 is less than 10, that evaluates to true. So x becomes 8. 8 is less than 10, therefore I iterate again. Now x is 9. 9 is the new value. 9 less than 10 is true. That evaluates to 10. With the 10, that evaluates to false. Sorry. That evaluates to false, and therefore I do not iterate inside of the loop. So at the end of the loop, the value of x would be 10. And I went through the loop, which basically the code inside of the loop is the plus plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times exactly. If you're looking at these values, that's how I counted them. And that is it for our examples with the while loops. Until next time, goodbye.